Thank you, Elise. Of course, we are now live on Rwanda television, of course, and the program is in focus. As always, my name is Eugene Anangwe. It is definitely in focus o'clock. We are really sure that we've really eaten into the show quite a bit, definitely due to unavoidable circumstances. We'll be able to see how we can recover those 10 minutes right here on the program. It is an interactive program, definitely very interactive. All you simply need to do is already start tweeting. The hashtag to always use is InFocusRW. You do not need to tag me or any other person. Simply add that particular hashtag. We'll be able to read your tweet right here. Like you can see already, our conversation today is going to center on financial literacy in Rwanda and the role of the central bank in ensuring this or the raising of a financially literate society. These are the tweets that already have been coming in thick and fast. We have Bisangwa Redempt. That is at Bisangwa Redempt. She says, this is going to be an interesting, long and deep discussion. I will applaud Central Bank for making some efforts towards this, combined efforts from other financial institutions. It will make this achievable. Otherwise, Central Bank alone will take ages. Definitely alluding to the fact that we need concerted efforts to achieve this. Another one from Ferdinand. He says here, why not reaching out to schools, markets, and other public places? I think BNR needs to do a lot because it seems to be an only public institution in charge of financial matters which are not easy to digest for many, yet it lives far from the public. These are not my words. These are the words of those who are watching us. Definitely, we'd love to hear from you. What more can the central bank do to engage even better the public? Of course, with the aim of raising a financially literate economy. Right, of course, the central bank did come up with a campaign called BNR Engage. The aim of this was to try and be able to reach out even better. Will this work? Will this be part of the solution to the issue of raising our financially literate society? Let's take a look at this video, and then we'll be coming back to introduce our panelists in the program.
The National Bank of Rwanda is not like the usual commercial banks. It is not motivated by profit. It is Rwanda's central bank. This means that the National Bank of Rwanda has a task of keeping Rwanda's economy on the right track by maintaining price stability and ensuring that the financial system in Rwanda is safe and sound. BNR maintains price stability by managing inflation and ensures a sound financial system by supervising banks and other financial institutions in Rwanda to make sure they're not taking on too many risks. Perhaps the most known role of BNR is that it prints and designs money. While that is true, it is a small part of what BNR has created in different ways, as will be explored in later series. The National Bank of Rwanda is not a commercial bank, and therefore an individual cannot open an account at BNR or ask it for a loan. However, BNR does act as a bank for the commercial banks and government institutions. Commercial banks can turn to BNR to borrow money, usually to cover very short-term needs. BNR is also tasked with managing reserves to ensure that the country is able to deal with any external shocks that may arise. As a bank of banks, BNR is responsible for the smooth functioning of payment systems for banks and traded financial instruments. In this regard, BNR also supports the development of payment systems in the country. BNR also plays an important role in informing the public about the economy. In the series to follow, details on how BNR operates in order to achieve its objectives, as well as other economic concepts, will be explained.
Right, indeed, all those details will be explained right here. And of course, let me just introduce our panelists. We have P. Suwase, Director General, Financial Stability at the Central Bank of Rwanda. Thank you for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Also with us on the program, not the first time, Agutamba Ken, who's actually Chief Strategist at Impact Communication. Thank you for joining us on the program. And of course, we have Kibe Waringa, who's the Country Director, Access to Finance, Rwanda. Thank you for joining us on the program. Indeed, it is a conversation that is very interesting. On one front, it actually puts the central bank and other financial institutions, on the dissecting table as far as what role they play in pushing towards a financially literate society. But before we even go deeper into the BNR Engage and what we're going to be talking about today, very people differently understand the term financial literacy, and I think it's important we start from there. What defines a financially literate person, or what are the parameters that we look at to determine that this is a financially literate society? Who even decides that? Please.
Well, in terms of financial literacy, I think that the key thing that you look out for is, are people able to make informed decisions with regard to how they manage their money matters? I think broadly speaking, really that's what financial literacy is about. In terms of gauging whether a society is financially literate or illiterate, I guess you'd be looking at different measures regarding how people actually do relate with money. How do they save? How do they invest? How do they make money decisions? So that is something that probably you would need different stakeholders to have a say in terms of measuring how literate the society is or how illiterate it is.
That's how you'd look at it. I mean, Agutamba, based on that definition, I mean, a lot of people have said that we have a lot of people who are still not financially literate, because if you look at the rates of, or the numbers of people who are banked, if you look at the number of people who even can perform financial transactions, there's still a very, very wide gap. And the challenge here is probably the strategies as to how we can be able to lift these people from that illiteracy level to the level that we all aspire to have. I mean, where are the gaps for you?
And that's a sustained, it calls for a sustained strategy. It's not something you do, and I agree with the definition, by the way. At the center of that definition is education, an educated public, empowered to actually take informed decisions. But that's a result, and there's a whole process behind it. So getting there is, I guess, the reason we are here tonight.
Yes.
How do you achieve that? And that's why I'm saying it's it takes a long strategy, sustained strategy to actually achieve that. What we've seen maybe in the past is that probably we've been influenced by marketeers whose philosophy is totally different. They go for short campaigns, bombard you with messages, confuse you psychologically to push you towards the sale.
Before you go any far, is this what BNR Engage is about?
To confuse? No, absolutely not. No, I think what BNR Engage is about is that, you have to look at it with a long-term view. You have to look at it in terms of you're investing in society. You may not actually see the results immediately. It's a long-term issue. I don't know if this is the point at which I jump in,
Sure.
in terms of what exactly we are looking at with the BNR Engage, and even the strategy that we've taken with regard to what we are doing under the BNR Engage program. Recently, when we launched the program, we did actually start out with a campaign within the schools. So our view is that the young people that are in school today eventually are the ones that are going to grow into adulthood and are going to be associating with money in different, at different levels, at policy level, but even individually. So we've started with that campaign within the schools, and that really does speak to the long-term view with which we are looking at it. We're not looking at, coming up with short programs, and probably historically that's probably what we have done. We've come up with a campaign, cashless. We come speak about cashless, go away, come back, speak about savings, and not really looking at it holistically. So what we are doing now is actually take a long-term view of it and actually, come back to the drawing table and say, what is it that we want to do? What do we want to achieve? What are the different target groups that we are looking at, and what message are we going to send out to these particular different target groups?
Right.
Because what you're going to speak to children in primary school is going to be different to what you speak to kids in high school or in college, or adults that are already relating with money but have not been financially literate. The rural areas, the message that you're taking to the rural areas is probably going to be different with what you're communicating in the cities and the towns. So it's important that we take a broad view.
And this is what you're doing with BNR Engage. I think we'll delve a bit deeper into it, especially even on the nature of the messaging. Of course, as you said, different groups, different messages.
Yes.
Kibe, I mean, at Access to Finance Rwanda, you two have also been working hard to ensure that this financial literacy is achieved, and also, you know, the public is aware of their rights and the matters, finance and everything. Where do you see the gaps? I mean, BNR comes and says, we think we now want to look at things holistically, away from how we've been looking at things. Looking at this program or this campaign that she says is long-term, where do you think the gaps have been, and do you see BNR Engage coming to fill those gaps?
I think it's, I'll just build on what they have said. I think AFR has done a lot to support financial education. In the past, I think 2015, we actually supported the inclusion of the curriculum in the financial education into the national curriculum. And I want to go back to what Peace said about what financial literacy is. So you could have a lot of knowledge, like we can have it in the curriculum. So the student, by the time they reach senior 6, knows a lot about products and services. But financial literacy also talks about the skills. So I have known all these things. So in the end, what do I do with it? In the end, do I save? And when I say, I want to save, am I able to say for this short term, I want to keep money for a short term, let me do a fixed deposit. I want to keep money that I can quickly call, so let me leave it here. So that skill to be able to navigate the system also is what you can say capability or literacy. So I think what BNR is doing, going to school and all that, you find, like if you go to a school, you're telling them more about financial education, but you find they already can remember in the entrepreneurship class, the teacher had said, in their social studies, the teacher had said. So it's like enhancing, but it's not the one-time message that really will work. It is a process over time. It's in the curriculum. Then maybe some schools also are engaging in savings clubs. So there is an application to the skill we are learning, because there are schools here that have savings club. So it's an important thing, but it needs to find continuous, ongoing engagements at a user level, yeah, whether it's school.
So what do you think did stop us from doing what we're doing now? I mean, what has hit us that has now made us run on the road and say that, you know what, I think this works? And even as they come up with this, as you say, that, you know, they come and find that some students already have these skills or have this knowledge, how do we ensure that they still see the interest in what would seemingly be something that would say, I already know that, it's a waste of time, repetition, blah, blah, blah. How do they ensure that that interest still remains among the people who are targeted?
Okay, and maybe not just the students. We can just go to normal people listening. I think interest will be sustained where I can come and talk about savings, but it's backed by a financial institution within the same area that comes and says, you heard about this, but this is the product. So sustaining the message is about usability, about people picking up the product. Because I can come here and talk about, oh, you can buy some land by saving for a certain period of time, or by taking this loan. But unless I have a product that I will sign up to, it just remains a message. So the message must be backed up by maybe financial institutions coming in to ride on the wave of the messaging and then provide the service. And in a language that can be understood. So that people sign up. Yes.
Agutamba.
But I just want to kind of put you off a bit. And you see, your topic tonight raises a $64,000 question. And to unpack it, you have to give it a proper global frame of analysis. What central bank is doing in Rwanda is actually something that is following a global trend. If you follow all central banks around the world, and I may track it from the 2008 economic crisis, which kind of changed everything. Now, before that, central banks didn't have an interest in talking to a Muturaje. They had a very traditional audience. The banks, commercial banks, the markets and their agents, and that's it. You know, so they would publish their 50 pages, you know, on inflation, and these people would understand them and would be relied on to take the message to the rest of the market. But 2008 brought something totally different, which limited the trust that us people had in the so-called experts. Now, what you're seeing globally is that central banks now are widening the scope of their audience, and they want to get the megaphone this is an example, the megaphone, to talk directly to the people, to talk to every citizen, the participants in the general economy. So they are, you know, going beyond talking to commercial banks, talking to the markets, and now talking to the muturage. Now, the question is, what's the message? What are the tools they're using? Because in the past, talking to a marketeer or a commercial bank, it's very easy. Summon them to central bank for a Monday morning meeting, talk to the CEOs, but that's not how you talk to a market woman in Nyabugogo, to a student at Indera, to anyone else, you know. So BNR Engage, you have to look at it and analyze it from a couple of aspects. One, the communication audit. Where were we before we started BNR Engage? Where were the gaps? And those gaps, you have to look at them following a couple of things. Communication tools, the communication infrastructure that BNR is using. If you look at the way they were communicating before 2008, like right now, you see a lot of commercial, central banks active on Twitter. I think the most active is the Central Bank of Indonesia. They have close to 700,000 followers, followed by that of Mexico, you know. So all of a sudden, you're seeing central banks active on platforms where they weren't before 2008 or a decade ago. What are they doing there? They want to reach people they were not previously interested in. But to do that, central bank has to look at the message. Because in the past, central banks' messages were, let's be honest, boring and very difficult
to understand.
Yes, and there is actually research that backs this. Somebody did research and they found that while 70% of the people understood Donald Trump's campaign message, 80% understood Kendrick Lamar's rap lyrics. Only less than 5% understood these 50 pages that central bank churns out in form of inflation and interest rate reports.
Exactly. And I think that is where peace comes back. And let's look now specifically to those key issues that he mentions. The tools, the packaging of the message. Let's interestingly start from the messaging, the packaging of the message. How different is the central bank now going to be packaging whatever kind of communication that it is having that would inform the public, or it would serve the interest that it is actually being created for?
I think we have to start at the point that we have different audiences that we are speaking to. So there is an audience that will actually still require those inflation reports, that will still require to read and digest the information that we communicate in the economic review. You have researchers, you have policymakers who derive a lot of information from these reports that are issued. But moving beyond that, we were actually having a conversation within the bank, and our communication team was, speaking to us about these things. And the issue now is to be able to communicate some of these key messages in a way that even our own grandmothers can understand it. I think now there's a term that is trending, grannyfying information, communicating it in a way that even your grandmom can understand this information. And just building up to from what Ken was saying, the reason for this is that as the economy has changed, the way we're doing monetary policy is changing. We have previously relied on managing supply of money. There's too much liquidity in the market. You take the liquidity out by, whatever instruments that we use. There's shortage of liquidity, you inject money into the economy. But now we're moving away from that and relying on interest rates as a key monetary policy tool. Now, for you to rely on interest rates as a monetary policy tool, you've seen us go, after our monetary policy committee meetings, we issue these press releases. Either we've reduced the key repo rate or we've kept it stable. And for that to be effective, for that to work, you need to have the market responding to whatever decision the central bank has done. If you're reducing the key repo rate, we're actually communicating a message of interest rates, going downwards in order to stimulate the economy. But you need a population that is literate,
that understands,
to interpret that information and to actually push for the banks to actually apply this message that the central bank is communicating. As it has been today, you review interest rates and, in terms of the end result that is coming to the Muturaje, there's really no effect. So we've realized that there's a break in that, what we call the transmission mechanism. You're communicating one thing, but the market is not really responding
So
to
what
that.
have you done about that?
So that's where now financial education and literacy becomes really important. So the way we are going out and communicating to the public, and that's part of this BNR Engage program. So, it starts from different things that we're doing. So this BNR Engage, for example, that was targeted to the youth. We've introduced economic clubs within. We took a sample of about 12 schools within Kigali.
Yes.
And within these schools, we are encouraging them to debate on these issues of monetary policy and financial, the financial sector, essay writing and competitions in that space. And the plan is to actually, once we piloted that within those 12 schools, the plan is to now roll it out, across the country. So that's a platform for the youth. We've had, in collaboration with the Ministry of Finance, we did start something targeted to SACCOs, and that's now reaching, the population to really to the grassroots.
So
right?
each of these groups have different communication language for each of them.
Yes, yes, yes. So you will have that the channel within the youth that is actually, interesting them to understand these issues that we're talking about that seem, very complex, but to simplify it. Then you have the messaging to the rural population within the SACCOs, and we're working on actually. This is work in progress, really. Yeah? So this is like part of the initial steps that we're taking in that direction, and we're working on building a clear strategy for each of these target groups. One of the other things also, in terms of what we have done in this regard, we previously handled financial education mixed up with the other many activities that we were doing. So we had financial education within financial stability, which is supervision of financial sector. You had a bit of financial education within our monetary policy department, talking about economics and all that. But now we've realized that that is really not becoming effective, and we've set up a separate department that is actually going to drive these issues of education, driving from what I was speaking about earlier in terms of having a holistic view of this thing. So we have a specific department that is going to be driving matters of financial inclusion and education. And that's really part of taking a long-term view of these engagements in terms of education.
Of the engagement. I mean, Kibe, when you're on the ground with the various stakeholders that you work with, most of the time, some of the things that we've seen is that most people feel that, the central bank on its own, its role is to simply just make these announcements. The key repo rate has been, kept the same. Announce the inflation figures and how the economy is doing. But there's a feeling of being out of direct contact with this central bank. And they've always felt that probably that's not the person of our league. We can't actually deal with them. We have to deal with other institutions, the SACCOs and everybody else. Do you think this is simply because the language of economics is simply a tough language? That find those advertisements, those messages boring and just, so much jargon out there. Do you think that this could be the reason? And then how then do you think practically this language can be simplified?
I think you have to look at the role of the central bank. Because the clip that showed was saying central bank is not a normal bank.
Yes,
I can't come and open an account. Clearly that's it. I can't come and open an account there because they don't serve me directly. The central bank serves me through other channels, whether it is banks, whether it is all these other institutions, insurance. So for me interacting, really, I don't interact with the central bank as a normal citizen. I would expect that whatever is said is also broken down a little bit for ease of understanding by the person who supplies me with financial services, because that person is not the central bank. The person who supplies me financial services is the bank, is the MFI, is the SACCO, is the insurance company, is the whoever it is. So I think I would expect communication to be broken down to us as citizens from those financial service suppliers. Yes, and I think the only way you communicate to someone is when you understand them. The only way you communicate to a spouse is when you understand. The only way you communicate to a child is when you understand your child. So I think for us, the challenge is for us as financial service suppliers, providers, to understand our clients. What do they really need at a certain time? If I am supplying potatoes all the way from the north, coming to bring to Kigali, what are my financial needs? How can you pack it? And then you can teach me based on my need. That's the only way I listen, because you are understanding me. So I think communication, once the central bank has an agenda for the whole country and wants to communicate something for the whole country, then needs to be broken down by the supplier of the service us to make it applicable to my life. As a normal citizen.
Right. So I see, Ken, you want to jump in, but as you come in, just speaking from what Waringa says, then it clearly looks as if the central bank does its part by actually outlining the agenda for the country, and then the communication now between the ordinary mwananchi gets disconnected. This information that came from the central bank through the suppliers of the financial services, as Waringa says, gets lost within these financial services providers. Is there where you see the problem?
Yeah, I'll recommend two gaps. I'll highlight two gaps. But before I highlight them, I want to say that over the years, what people have come to agree with is that for the central bank, it's not just having a good and sound monetary policy, it's also having a strong and effective communication strategy. Which is why probably I would tag the BNR Engage, which seems to be taking the central bank out for a walk to meet a lot of people you guys have not met over the years. But now in doing that, and it's also something we can applaud, the fact that institutionally, from the outside looking in, you see an institution that seems to appreciate the importance of communication. And personally, I know that some of the people behind central bank, I know like the governor is a very keen person on the press, like when he's giving his press conferences, he's so patient with the press that you could ask a very, well, I won't use the words, but he'll be patient and answer it in the easiest language possible to send a message home. Which leads me to one of the gaps that answers your question. The nature and capacity of our financial press to help the central bank actually break down what some people have called useless, impenetrable waffle into very simple, friendly language that talks directly to the Muturaji. Because price stability is about how you spend and how much you pay. It's about you planning ahead that, prices are going to be turbulent in coming month. Let me plan ahead. But in between the central bank and the Muturaji is the financial press. The question we need to give time to is how empowered is our local financial press in being a partner of the central bank in actually communicating to a wider audience in Rwanda? And you can't deal away with the financial press. So there is something we need to do with financial press. Let's work with them. Let's create a financial press corp movement whereby we build the capacity of the financial press to actually help you take the message down. Two, which builds into what my colleague here says, is that the central bank cannot walk this walk alone. The strategy you design, and I'm glad you say this is a long-term campaign, you need what I would call an integrated multi-stakeholder approach. Central bank needs to find a way of pushing commercial banks to spend more on educational and informational communication. My experience there is that there is a huge misunderstanding of marketing communication and educational or informative communication. And marketing communication is simple. I'm trying to get you to buy. And we do this in very short, repetitive, bombastic marketing messages so that by the end, you have no option but to buy. You have no option but to take the car loan. You have no option but to do this. But the central bank is different, and we saw that in the clip. It's regulatory, meaning that at the core of its communication objectives is information and education.
That's it.
But you cannot do this alone. So now, how do we get commercial banks to spend more of their marketing budgets onto communication for education and information? And you know how we can do this? Is to get them to push this budget into what you would call corporate social responsibility. Because education and information is a corporate social responsibility of the commercial banks. Because when we don't do that,
yes,
they take advantage of an uninformed.
I think Peace would be able to answer this. It's a very interesting point that Ken brings, especially on the use or the push to use their communication budgets and actually even have them. Some of them don't even have that, or those who have do not actually utilize them to the latter. Is this practical, what he suggests? Push them to use it in a form of social service responsibility.
Yeah, education, information.
Is this how you think they would easily look at it?
We can use what you call moral suasion, but we cannot push them to allocate their funding in any way, because that's really not what we're about. We're about them operating efficiently and remaining safe. So I wouldn't say that we can, we have the legal mandate to push them in terms of where they allocate money. But I think as we engage in these issues, it becomes very clear what also needs to be done on the part of the financial services providers. Of course, you also have to look at it from a commercial point of view, that they probably do not have a keen interest in investing in some of these things, because at the end of the day, for them, it's about returns, maximizing revenue, minimizing costs. Yeah. But I think, again, like we said, once you take a long-term view of it, and I think one of the other areas also that's going to help is that one of the areas that we're focusing on as a central bank is also consumer protection. So consumer protection is that we're pushing them to ensure that they're not taking advantage of their customers. So we're doing things like publicizing rates of all the banks. So as a consumer, if I'm going to get a service from Bank A, I have the option to actually compare what all the other banks are charging for this particular service.
So where are you publishing this?
Currently, we're publishing it on our website, but we're actively looking at how we can make that more user-friendly, more accessible to a wider population. But today, that information is actually published on our website.
And that's where they were saying that we have a society that is left out. Those
Yes.
who do not have internet,
I agree.
They get disadvantaged.
I
with
agree.
some of
So
these
there's still a gap there. But at least you can appreciate that there's been a step in the right direction. So for now, even we realize that information is probably even not that user friendly. It is static information. We're trying to see how we can build a website that makes that information more interactive and live and constantly updated. But again, like you said, that is probably targeting for a smaller group of people that has access to internet, but at least it's something to get us started. And then we can consider, can we use USSD codes with the feature phones? I don't know how applicable that is, but it is work in progress. And like I said, you have to take a long-term view of some of these things. We cannot get quick fixes immediately, but at least it's a journey that has started. I think for me, that's what
Allow me to add there. Yeah. I'm listening to him about the commercial bank. I think a commercial bank will not go there and tell people about everything in a very social way, like sign up with anyone you want. Like she's saying, the commercial bank does want to make interest for itself. So I see a better role with the association, like the Association of Microfinance Institutions, the Association of the Bankers, the insurers, if they have as an association, to give a general message of why insurance. Then the consumer can then choose. But the consumer then needs to be literate to know, oh, this insurance company, I cannot go there. They are more expensive, or they don't have good customer service. That's the part of the literate citizen choosing a service. So the associations then would be the ones providing that support to provide that general broad knowledge of what is this product about? How can it help you? And if you're not served well, what is the recourse? I see the associations while doing that, and then their members then can sell their products. And us as literate citizens can choose based on who best meets
your
our
needs.
needs. Because when you say the CSR departments in commercial, I don't know how much attention the CSR department or roles even would be given, or even the budgets they have to really do this kind of work.
I think probably the thing is the regulator decides and says, as part of promoting a financially literate society,
Yes.
all financial institutions must set aside 10% of their budget to communication. And communicating 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things, which we believe within this year will be able to sort the gap of knowledge in this specific area. This is something that I think can
And
be
for
able to
me,
work.
to be honest with you, you cannot say that commercial banks don't have the responsibility to educate their customers. Because one of the issues they're having with customers, if you look at the issue of non-performing loans, part of the cause is that you're dealing with clients who really don't understand some of the things. If you look at the stage of giving out a loan, for example, marketing communication will tell you that we're giving it to you at 13%, but they won't tell you some of the hidden charges that will actually find you paying more than that, and then you'll actually fail and default on the loan. So it's an issue of honesty. It's an issue of being corporately responsible. And let me give you an example of at least a commercial bank I know that has endeavored to do this, not because I've worked for them before,
You've already
but
said their
because,
name.
yeah, for example, Bank of Kigali, they have, because it's a listed bank, at least they commit 1% of their operating, capital to actually CSR. That's a lot of money. And they have deliberately put some of it to education. Education is one of the pillars of their CSR. Other banks can do this. KCB, for example, in Kenya, they have a strong foundation in Kenya. Why not here? It's not visible in Rwanda, but it's visible in Kenya. All the projects are dominant in Kenya. All these other banks, they have a good budget that you can commit to the education and information of you, because it's actually for the good of them. And this is what the central banks, for the time I've covered them and followed them, for example, the central bank governor has always said, face these banks, tell them, look, I have a good record as a customer. Why should you charge me? The risk is too high. I'm not risky. But you have to empower a customer with enough financial literacy to know that if my credit score is very good, I should be able to borrow at a friendly rate. But they are not able to do that because we have deliberately kept away this information, but pushed more of the marketing information, which is normally not honest.
Right.
Maybe if I can jump in there, I think there's something core that's coming up. So in terms of what can the central bank mandate banks or financial institutions to have a budget? We may not be in a position to mandate budgets, but one thing that we have mandated in terms of education, for example, is that we recently issued something we call a key fact statement regulation, which requires that the bank or the insurer, because we have key fact statements for both banks and insurance, that they actually sit with the client and explain to the client what it is that they're signing up for before they sign it.
And who actually oversees this?
That is ourselves. So actually, they're supposed to take time, like the example that Ken is giving. If you're actually taking out a loan, that a representative of the bank is sitting with you and explaining to you the terms and conditions of the contract, that it is very clear what all the fees that are going to apply to you in terms of that loan are going to be. And we do that both for loan products and even signing up, opening of accounts.
When I asked who oversees this, I meant during that process of signing or of going through that document with that client, who actually sits there to ensure that this happens?
No,
how do you know that this actually
So we do,
happen?
within our supervisory mandate, when we do what we call on-site inspections, if we come to check out, how a bank or an insurer is doing, that's one of the things that we're going to look at. Are you actually taking time and sitting down with your clients and explaining to them the terms and conditions of whatever it is, the contractual agreements that they're entering into with a bank? And there has to be evidence of a key fact statement signed by the customer in that, let's say, loan file or account opening file or whatever. So those are the things that we look out for. And if they're not, doing it, then, supervisory measures are
will be
taken
taken.
against
The
the banks.
gap
But
here-
this is relatively new. This is something that we started to implement last year. So we expect that this is something that's going to pick up with time.
So the viewer watching us right now, before they take up any financial facility,
Yes.
they need to be taken through all
Yes.
the hidden charges and
Absolutely.
every
Absolutely.
information.
Absolutely.
And then your supervisors would be walking in at any time to be able to check if this is being done.
Yes.
What if they walk in when there's no client who's actually...
No, it won't be like during the process.
Yeah.
It will go to a bank to look at many other things.
Okay.
The way they are operating, compliance with so many regulations that they're required to comply with, and that's going to be one of the things that we look at. So we may not need to witness, the physical explanation and sign up, but at least there has to be evidence that this was actually done with the customers.
Let me bring in Waringa. I mean, do you feel this would make that citizen watching us right now who felt that the central bank is nowhere in my life, feel that at least there's someone watching over what I'm getting into and there to protect me from being, getting into deals where there's some hidden charges and so forth?
Yes, and quite important, because even the mandate that you display your rates, you display your costs so that we see them as we enter the institution. I think that's an important role that the central bank plays, because the central bank must protect even us, through consumer protection. So it's a very important role, because otherwise, financial products are not easy. Especially when the font is very small. You barely know what you're signing up to.
We actually dictate even the font of the contract.
Lovely.
That key fact statement.
Yes, yes.
What's the font?
I think it's Times New Roman 12 or something like
So if
that.
it is smaller
But
than
it should be, no, it should be, 12 is legible, eh?
12 is legible.
Yeah.
12 is, so that is important. That's where we are protected, so that we know what we are signing up to. But you have to ask a very practical question like, am I literate?
Yes.
So that the person I come to meet at the bank then, if I'm not literate, gives me the time to explain and give me the time to talk me through.
Because sometimes you're just told, sinyahano.
Actually, and you know where that comes from?
Yes.
Is, I guess it's a psychological issue, but I also guess it's a financial illiteracy issue. Because most people I've seen actually feel like the banker is making you a favor by giving you the loan.
True.
And I've always found it weird. People literally will be begging to take the loan. And I know it's a malpractice that a lot of leaders have been punishing. After getting the loan, you'll get somebody giving you a kickback, 100K. Wakoze cyane gumfasha. How? So, you see, financial literacy will destroy you. Financial literacy will build you. Most of these financial products we have on the market, they will not develop our people if our people are not armed with useful educational information that puts them in a position where they can take out a product based on an informed decision. Which is why I still insist, I want to see commercial banks doing more, marketing less, educating more, and informing more.
Marketing less, informing more. Peace. I mean, there's a question he raised on the literacy or the quality of the financial press.
Yes.
Which is very key, I believe, because in the end, if the press is not aware or is also not financially literate, then it speaks volumes as to how much literate the people that they talk to will be. What strategies do you have, I mean, in this end, in order to see how you can build more partnerships and even raise the capacities of those who you'll be partnering in to disseminate this information to create a literate society?
I think it's a very valid issue that he raises, and you can see it almost, with direct evidence that, we have MPC. Once you've had the meeting, the articles that are being written are really not communicating what you wanted to be communicated. So what we've started an engagement with the press where we actually do trainings for them in terms of you have to start from basics and continuously, retool, retrain, re-educate the journalists. But we do have an engagement, continuous engagement of training journalists that actually do report on these economic matters.
Do you think it's going to be easy? Because most of us in the press are far comfortable with doing entertainment shows, you know, now you're talking numbers and facts and statistics. Will this be an easy ride?
But I think there are those like Ken who would be interested in going that line. So I think all of you, and Anangwe, and I think the opportunity.
I hope you've shown up for this.
The training. I think our communications manager actually attended. So I think that is important, so that when you report, you know how to report, but also to break down. But in terms of information, maybe we also look broadly in terms of how best do you communicate to people? What are the mediums that are most effective? And just looking at like some study we did on FinScope, which we all know about FinScope, people were asked, when you're making a financial decision, who do you listen to most? Do you know they listen to most to their partner or spouses? And then to a family friend, a family member, before they go down to other people in their groups of, like savings groups or groups of people close to them. So information, for me to take up a financial product, there has to be a level of trust. Who do I trust more? So that what they are telling me, I know it is to my own best interest. So as we allowed the initiative to train the press, but also we need also perhaps as they continue the expansion to talk about radio and how best to package messages there, because people listen to radio all the time. And at least thank God for mobile phones. The radio on the mobile phone is so used. So those are channels that we can really use to break down. You know, complex things must be said in such a simple way.
Right.
Yeah.
Complex things must be said in a simple way. Please.
There is a joke. I think it was a banker or an economist. They said, if you understood what I said, then I think I misspoke. So,
Central Bank of Bank of England.
Absolutely, that's the one. As we teach journalists how to report on central banks and matters financial, we need a new form of non-conventional storytelling. Whereby you break down, don't delete an article with too many numbers, but let the Mutura just see themselves in the numbers. You know, that way people are going to relate to the information. But at least it also raises an issue of we need, as a central bank, we need to look at the communication strategy we're using to push BNR Engage. It has to be a multi-channel, communication strategy. Because Anangwe may be reaching 1 million Rwandans, but there is another 10 million Rwandans that are on other platforms. So you want to be almost on all of them, but in a strategic and sustainable way, so that your message actually reaches almost everyone, because you want the megaphone and you want to reach everyone.
Very interesting indeed. Of course, it's important for us to also check what they are saying on our social media platforms before we go, because I remember that we did start a bit late, and of course it's important that we economize on the time that we have. I have Gustav Emilian, a good friend of the program. He says that Agutamba, spot on kabisa, bankers should educate rather than milk their customers. Peace, how do we ensure this happens?
I said
as a
through the key fact statements, they are obliged to.
They're obliged to do that. But are we sure that they're actually doing that? That is actually going to be a very important aspect to look into. Are you going to do that? I mean, what strategies do you have that you can actually share very quickly?
Like I said, through supervisory review of the banks and actually checking that they're doing what they're legally obliged to do. We may not dictate what marketing budget goes into education, but at least in terms of avoiding exploitation of their customers, we will do that through supervisory tools.
You'll do that for sure. Bisangwa Redemptor says, happy to hear about the efforts for those in school. However, there is a segment that is out of school and are actually making ends meet to have a salary. Long thread alert. I'm sure this one is coming. But can we say something about that?
Yes, because I think there are many programs. A lot NGO supported working with out-of-school youth. A lot of entrepreneurship and financial education in those programs. So they are not a forgotten people, a lot. I think there are many programs that have been organized by a lot of NGOs,
including
both local and international, supporting out-of-school youth. Yes.
Okay.
So and I think the other thing that we have to look at, like Ken said earlier, it's multi-stakeholders. I think we shouldn't leave out our places of worship. This is a good place to communicate this information. Our social groups, you know, there's so many other channels that we can use to pass on these messages that is not just the central bank or the financial institutions.
Right. Important. Another one from Brian says here, also when I went to get a line of credit at my bank, they only offered me a short-term loan that they wanted fully repaid within 1 month based on my monthly salary. It seems to me the options or choices available for borrowing or lending is very challenging in Rwanda. This is perception out there. Indeed, it's important to understand that there are people who are feeling that there is more that needs to be done. As Ken said, when the bank gives you a loan, it's not a favor that they're doing to you. All right? And of course, ensure that you are not exploited. You go through those forms. What was the name of the form again?
The key fact statement.
The key fact statement. Which in Rwanda?
Hey.
Do we have it?
I shall
Is it
come
in
back to
Kinyarwanda?
yes,
It's there.
yes. It's in English, Kinyarwanda, and French.
And French.
Yeah.
Make sure you have that one. Make sure you tell them you want that one that was in English. Which camera is for me? I think it's that one. Yes, make sure they give it to you so that you're not exploited, so that there are no hidden charges. And of course, the team at BNR will be able to move around in the supervisory role to ensure that a lot is done, to ensure that you make the right choices and right financial choices. A lot needs to be done. The consultative efforts needs to be done by other major stakeholders, of course, and to ensure that we are all financially literate as far as these matters of economy are concerned. From me, and of course, on behalf of the team that has made this program a success, thank you so much for watching. BNR, thank you for sponsoring this conversation. Indeed, it speaks volumes to ensure that the message is there and your role is actually seen. We'll see you again next time, same place. Of course, my name as always is Eugene Anagwe. Good night.
Rwandair, renowned for its tremendous ability to fulfill your dreams,